which forced me to go back and write several more pages in my book to deal with it. I didn't think I could deal with it, but it turns out I did. I'm going to call that the slutty response. Because the problem with it is this: don't lower your standards. You don't want to be too slutty. Here's what happens when you're too slutty. Floodgate problem. If we lower our standards to allow magic in Jerusalem and Salem, now there's magic everywhere. African witch hunts that are being conducted right now as we speak. The Inquisition is full of magical accounts that we have better historical corroboration of than we've got about the resurrection. We've got other incompatible religious miracles. We've got many other non-Christian religions that claim to have miraculous advents that we have historical evidence for. We've got Saudi Arabian witchcraft trials in 2006, and probably last year as well. We've got, in Saudi Arabia, they are currently having witch trials. And they're finding them guilty. So and in many cases, executing them. So in those instances, the evidence we have is by far better quality and quantity for thinking those women are really witches as invariably women. Because the Saudis love women. I can say that, right? Islam has got a worse track record than Christianity about the treatment of women. I can say that. I feel quite responsible for that. So we've got witchcraft evidence in modern Saudi Arabian witchcraft trials that would give us better evidence for magic. And you've got to accept now, if you take the lower our standards approach, you've got to accept all of that, because that's all better than the Jesus case. YouTube's full of cases like it. There's faith healers on TV every weekend, con men, spiritualists, seances, miraculous healings. This stuff is everywhere. 70% of Americans believe in the power of prayer. So if that's an indicator, you've got another 200 million or more Americans who think that they have these mental conversations with God and that produces magic. It magically changes the lottery numbers, or it magically produces a raise at their job, or a promotion, or sends a beautiful woman into their life, or whatever, right? You've got people believing in the power of prayer, which would mean we'd have to accept all of those as authentic cases of magic. Maybe that's why lots of people say, yeah, sure, that happens all the time. So they don't see the problem with that. Many of these events are easily revealed as frauds or mistakes. I think it's just a little bit of investigation shows that in fact that's not what's happening. Furthermore, many of the religious miracles are contrary to Christianity. So it seems to me that the historical Christian has got a dilemma now. They've lowered their standards enough to let Jesus in, and that means all of these other religions rush in too. But many of the other religions are exclusive, and they say they will adamantly deny the authenticity of the Jesus miracles. So what do you do? If Muhammad really did talk to Gabriel and produced the Quran in Islam, then that's exclusive or rules out the possibility of the authenticity of Jesus, because the two can't jive. You can't have both of those be true. They're incompatible. You can't consistently accept Jesus' divinity and reject Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, animism, and all of these others. Lowering our standards makes us to be gullible, slutty, and contradictory dudes. All right, so I don't think that that's the answer. I also don't think that splitting the cases works. Here's why, and this is a bit more abstract. But somebody might make this objection. They'd say, well, they're disanalogous. Jesus and Jerusalem and Salem are different cases. There are features of the Jesus case that make it reasonable to accept the resurrection, but not witchcraft. They're different, and you falsely saddled the two of them together. All right, so I want to know what those are. What are the features about the Jesus case that set it off and make that body of crappy historical information reliable or trustworthy in the Jesus case, but I can't accept the much more rigorous and much larger body of evidence in the Salem case? And of all the candidates I've heard, none of them have struck me as even remotely plausible. They sound like ad hoc justifications or special pleading. Oh, well, Jesus is different because. And people are more or less making up some special exception that applies to Jesus, but it's not historically or not justified in principle. They're sort of making a special exception that only applies to Jesus, but they're not willing to apply that in other cases. My sense is that whatever features that are singled out about the Jesus case, that someone says, oh, well, your list doesn't include this. Okay, give me what you think really makes the difference, and we can go find a whole bunch of other examples in history that meet those criteria that also produce magic conclusions. And so whatever those are, we're going to be able to find. You're going to have a floodgate problem again happen in those cases. The other problem here is just the flat-out lack of information about the Jesus case. And this actually has worked to the advantage of believers, of historical Christians. And here's what I mean. We know so little about Jesus. Our information is so fragmented, and so tenuous, and so remote from the source, we don't have enough information to say that the same natural explanation wasn't the case at Jerusalem. So someone says, oh, well, in Salem, we know that it was rotten rye grain. One of the theories is that there's a kind of LSD cousin molecule that was present in some rotten rye grain, and it made all these people trip their asses off and see and imagine all of this stuff. And there's a couple of other natural explanations circulating around amongst historians about what happened in Salem. See, now the thing is about Salem, it's relatively recent, it's only in the 1600s, so we've got all this information about Salem, and we can go and construct a natural explanation on the basis of this large body of information. We don't have anything about Jesus, so Jesus conveniently escapes the same kind of connection to some detailed, natural, alternative account, because we don't know anything about Jesus. Were we to have the same comparable large body of information about Jesus that we have about Salem, presumably we could look and see if maybe one of these other explanations fits. But we just don't know enough, so Jesus slips by. Objections that say, clearly the evidence shows that something other than real witchcraft was going on in Salem overlook what we don't know about Jesus. The lack of information prevents us from being able to say the same thing about Jesus. Oh, well, that wasn't true about Jesus. We don't know whether that's true about Jesus. So the problem, the cases are comparable in the important ways, I maintain, and we have so much more and such better evidence about Salem that we have to reject both. Conclusion, no resurrection, no witches. You already don't believe in Jesus. That is, by application of the Christian's own standards, the broader implications that they can't accept it. The principles in good sense that lead us to conclude that there were no real witches in Salem, and many other conclusions are sound. Those are good principles. You should go with those. The ones that lead you to think there's not magic in Salem. Those principles that are good sense already show us that Jesus was not resurrected, and that Rebecca Nurse did not actually cast any magic spells. We should not believe that Jesus came back from the dead. Thanks. Questions? Yeah.
I guess I have several responses. It's really interesting. I kind of like the idea of trying to compare these claims and sort of their implications. I think, well, at the risk of looking like, study group, I mean, I myself am a Christian, and I've actually, even just for academic purposes, had to study a decent amount of early church history, and I feel like sources-wise, there's a little bit more to work with than maybe kind of what you've outlined.
With Jesus?
Yeah, not to the extent that they prove the resurrection, but I don't know. I feel like there might be a little bit more to kind of corroborate some of the, at least the claims that there was a group of people that believed in a resurrection. Of course, it won't prove that there was any resurrection, but by the first century. I mean, Mark, for instance, the last bit, even in a Bible at any evangelical church, it says, this section is not in earlier sources, so that's not kind of a deal breaker in itself. And references from Tacitus and Josephus in the first century referring to this group of Christians. So I don't know, how do you feel about those sources?
So those are the other historical corroborations that are referred to in the list. So Josephus refers to the Christian movement. So sure, I mean, I'm not denying that there was a Christian movement. It looks like in the first century there were a number of people who, I don't know how big it was here. What we get is, see, here's the problem. You're here now, and you're viewing all of this through this lens. And all of this has been sort of run through this various levels of filtration. So allegedly there's this event here, and now this gets repeated a number of times for 30 years. No written documents here, no written account. And the eyewitnesses don't, maybe they talked to this guy, we don't know. Now, we get Josephus corroborating late in the first century, I think, that there was this Christian movement. And there's no question that the thing grows, and grows by leaps and bounds, I suppose, in the first 2 centuries. Now, the advent of new religious movements and enthusiastic converts swelling the ranks of a new religious movement, that's quite common. I mean, that happens all the time. And it was far more common in the first century than it even is now. And now it's quite common, right? So we don't really doubt that. What I'm really specifically worried about is the resurrection. It all comes down on that, right? So I'm not sure what else, what are these other sort, I mean, you said yourself, maybe the case for the historical accuracy of the Gospels is better than I've argued. Okay, why and how good is it?
I mean, I don't know. I think it is hard to say. I mean, of course, also archaeological evidence slight. There's not a ton, but enough things that are mentioned in the New Testament that there's findings of today in present-day, Palestine, Israel. But
right. So I'll go back to that.
But I think, I don't know. I guess for me, what it comes down to is, okay, then there's kind of a mixture. You said yourself, you can't only, if you're only using the Bible, the Spider-Man problem, if you only use the Bible
right.
To believe in the resurrection, then something is off. And so I think for myself, that there definitely is more than that, but
yeah, so my number 7, historical corroborations of many other New Testament events. That's right, the destruction of the temple. We know we've got a date placed on that. And we know lots about Jerusalem at the time. We do have archaeological evidence about some various events. Herodotus, the historian, and Josephus, as you mentioned, both have some oblique mentions about the Christian movement. None of those, as far as I know, mention the resurrection. They do mention that there are early people who follow this guy, and they're Christian.
And I would have to check, but I feel like one of them, either just in the story classes, does say something to the effect of this group who claims that their leader came back from the dead, or something along those lines.
We can grant all of that. I don't know if that's the case, but we can grant all of that. Right? I can find you, right now, I can Google it and find you thousands of people claiming to have seen some miraculous event, right? And so any responsible historian can say there's a bunch of people who believe this. It's absolutely right. What's that?
Elvis sighting.
Yeah, Elvis sighting, Michael Jackson sightings. There's a whole huge website dedicated to Michael Jackson is still alive and among us, and there's pictures out there. You know, much better evidence than we have for Jesus. We've got better evidence for the resurrection of Michael Jackson. I mean, it sounds mean, but I don't know what other conclusion to draw here. Okay?
I mean, if we were all trading telephones, we would have these sort of messages just, however many years or whatever. And this is basically like a big long game of telephone, where you've had all this. So at the very least, Christians should be highly skeptical of the stories and that the original content is lost, because if we can't even get the same message, to pass through a group of us right here, and how are they going to get some message that it's not at the very least? You have to at least be very skeptical, and especially that's your source. It's really crap.
And I think that not just the telephone point, I think that's right, but there's some particularly interesting, there's some unique facts about human psychology and magic beliefs, and supernatural beliefs or paranormal beliefs, and that presents us with a special case. and even with historical cases, we can have all the historical evidence you like that some Iron Age or Stone Age culture believes in some magical event, but we don't just take those claims at face value, right?
Right.
We take some of the things they say at face value, but what we do take, what a historian takes as minimally established is these people believe that the world was created by Beluga. But the mere fact that we've got resounding historical evidence that shows that this Stone Age culture believed that the entire universe was created by Beluga doesn't lead us to think the universe was created by Beluga, just with the Beluga. Yeah?
I wanted to respond to what she was saying. As far as there being historical facts in the New Testament, there's historical facts in novels. So just the fact that we have some historical accurate events happening there, that doesn't mean that you get to take the whole thing and say that this is true, just because there's an actual facts there.
Good.
And we also, historians have better evidence for John the Baptist than they do Jesus.
Yeah, that's good. Let me turn the tables then. I'll argue against my own case and see how you guys respond. What if somebody comes back at this argument and says, you're arguing for a kind of historical skepticism, and if we were to consistently and widely apply the kind of rigorous standard you're demanding, we're going to have to reject things like the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, or reject the claim that Caesar crossed the Rubicon, or you become, McCormick, a kind of historical nihilist. The history is dark or mysterious on your view. We can't know anything about history if we can't know this. You've set the bar too high. So I'm complaining about the slutty problem, and they can come back and say, well, you've put the bar so high that now you've got no history getting over the edge. So it's the opposite, we're the opposite of the prudish problem, the opposite of sluttiness. What do you make of that? Okay. I've got an answer, but here's what you think. Yeah.
It's feasible to think that contemporary Roman soldiers would see food on the Civil War and all that. It's not feasible to think that's only the other 100 years after the first century to see the resurrection. It's totally different.
So it's the time pass that makes you skeptical?
It's time that is going to be. So we have to go these sources.
I don't know if that's the best argument you can make. I think you're going to lose some stuff if you think it's just the time that's passed is what makes the difference. And you're going to lose some stuff you want to keep about history.
Well, I'm thinking that by that time we any primary sources by
right, most likely. Yeah, by the time John gets written, or by the time the end of Mark gets written, all the original eyewitnesses must have been dead.
What do you think Mark is 45 years after the death?
Average lifespan is about 20.
So
There's the
say
century.
you was 14 resurrection, like how I mean,
And 14-year-olds are really reliable too.
I know. Really close. Or like, I don't mean to use what you think I was I do think there's something very close to
Okay, so you want to have contemporary. Really, it's the time passage that moves you the
and
most.
people here. I mean, you have to be able to see it in the.
Okay.
Yeah,
So now, if we had, okay, so now let me push back. If we had sources that were closer to the time or to the area, suppose we had eyewitness accounts from these folks about Jesus being resurrected. Now your Caesar crosses the Rubicon standard has been satisfied, and now you've got to accept the resurrection.
by that standard, that's true.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say you'd have to accept the resurrection, like, right out, but maybe accept that they did believe the resurrection. I think that the Roman analogy isn't the best because, I mean, it's cliche to say history is written by the victors, but, I mean, if we're able to have other texts that support, Caesar's conquest or any of that, it makes a little bit more sense because of who had access to history writing, whereas early Christians didn't have that kind of same access to, propagating ideas or literacy and all of these things. I mean, I'm a historian of the modern period, and even more recent groups of people, historians have to be careful about this because you can't take written sources as your only evidence, because there are a lot of groups that do get silenced. So if looking in that sense, it's harder to see why Christians have to have met those same standards as Imperial Rome, for instance.
So I'm not sure on which way you're going with this. On which side of this you're sort of leaning towards?
I think I'm more responding to his kind of standard for, the Caesar and all of these.
That's good. Yeah.
I think we should be skeptical about what we're told, and I love Sidbar. Great.
Well, then now you lose the assassination of Abraham Lincoln,
I
and
think
you
we
lose
still
Caesar.
should be skeptical about a lot of those things because we're told through somebody else's eyes, and there are certain things that happen, but how they happen and how we were told they happened, it could possibly be different.
I hear you. I think you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater now. I think you're sure. Do the history accounts get it wrong sometimes? Absolutely. In our history books, in our classes, get it wrong sometimes.
I don't say throw it out, but what I'm saying, keep that skepticism there.
Well, no one's challenging that, but what about Abraham Lincoln, right? If we're going to say that the only ancient or historical stories we're going to accept are ones that meet this high level of proof, then we lose a whole bunch of history. And so the opposite problem for mine is setting the bar too high. And you're saying we should be skeptical. It sounds like you're agreeing. Yeah, we lose a bunch of history.
I'm not talking about losing it. Don't lose it. But always keep that in the back of your mind, how true it can be.
Well, nobody's challenging that.
And I don't mean the truth all ends with happening. I mean, just think about how it happened, why it happened.
I think we all ought to adopt a kind of defeasibility. We all have defeasible beliefs. Defeasible beliefs. Which means you're prepared to revise them in light of new information and change your mind should the new evidence lead you to do it. That's absolutely right. But we're wondering about whether we should accept something as true or not when we justify it. And the McCormick standard is set the bar too high, right? You guys got to say them. The McCormick standard set the bar too high, so now we don't have justification for anything historical.
Actually, I think
I think there's a sieve that's applied between things that are easily explained in naturalistic terms and things that are supernatural, right? Especially in ancient history. Josephus, I'm sure there are a lot of things in Josephus that people take very seriously, but he also describes people describing supernatural events seen in the skies. And I think we have that in Roman history too, where you have some magic where he's kind of done something. I think there's a case of a Jewish exorcist who does a show in front of an emperor and all like that. Now maybe there was really a show, but do we necessarily believe that he did genuine magic and genuine exorcism just because it's described? So I think there's a tendency to say, well, this event described, this makes sense. It happened in the natural world pretty easily. This other event, there's something like flies through the air, that's would require.
I think that's the right answer. I think we've got to consider what it is they're claiming happened. If they claim that Caesar crosses the Rubicon, that's one thing. If they're claiming magic is real, that's another thing. And we know good and well why Iron Age or Bronze Age people believed in magic. And we know lots of people believe in magic. Lots of people are mistaken when they believe in magic. So I think it has a lot to do with whether it's a supernatural claim, a paranormal claim, or whether it's a natural claim. And we have different standards of proof. We should have different standards of proof for those two kinds of claims. And that's why the Jesus case is separate and different. That's why it's different than Abraham Lincoln and different than Caesar.
But it's not different than Salem.
Jeff.
I'm just saying, but it's not different than Salem. That's kind of
right.
That brings you back to
Salem's
Salem.
got magic.
Right.
And nobody in here probably walked in the room thinking that magic was real at Salem. for precisely that reason.
Right. Well, you know, you're going to have historical accounts of Caesar crossing Rubicon, of Alvin the Great blazing a swath across, Eastern Europe, all that stuff. And you say to yourself, well, okay, so we have lots of eyewitnesses, we have some historical artifacts, we have archaeological digs, we have various people from various cultures that give accounts that more or less coalesce around a common narrative, and you say, well, okay, that seems like pretty likely. It's pretty unlikely that they would all have coalesced so well around this one account if it was something completely different. And then you have many other cases like that, where the historical record is very similar. And you say, okay, well, in these cases, they're on par, these kinds of cases. And then you look at Jerusalem and Salem, and you say, well, these cases are kind of on par. We have something that most of the time we treat like this. You know, most other religions, most claims of shaman, most faith healers, we do this with them. Say, well, that doesn't, most of these things turn out to be fraud. There's no good evidence for them. We're probably going to be pretty skeptical of those. And then we look at this one and say, well, this actually is much more like this than like Caesar crossing Rubicon.
I think that's the right way to treat this. It just occurred to me that it was widely reported that Caesar had magical powers. There were many Romans who thought that Caesar had possessed magic. Hell, there's people, lots of North Koreans thought that Kim Jong-il had magic powers. He's recorded just in the last 10 years to the first time he went and played golf, the North Korean National News Service reported that he made 16 holes in one on his first attempt at playing golf. And they think, and it was widely reported in North Korea, that the weather changed with Kim Jong-il's moves. Right? So there it is, it's on the news. We accept it? No, obviously not. Right? It's a magical claim, a supernatural claim, for good reason. Now, partly what's going on here, I think, is that, and this is actually where historians need philosophers to do what I'm doing, is that there apparently is a kind of presumption about epistemic parity between modern humans and first century humans. But in fact, you've got to consider the source. That the agents who are reporting the history in the first century are very different people than us. Epistemically, they're very different people than us. Most of them are illiterate. Most of them know very little, next to nothing about the inner workings of the real world. None of that was widespread or common knowledge to any of them. Their world would have been full of mysteries or puzzles. And the notion that magical forces or supernatural events would have just abounded. Would have thought those were everywhere. And this is not just mere speculation on my part. We know in general that as, well, I won't write it out, but in general, as education goes up, religiousness goes down. That belief in magic and the supernatural and religiousness is quite common amongst people who have no education. But then as they learn, as they find out about the things that we know now, 2,000 years later, they know vastly more, and people stop believing that stuff. Okay?
I think it's also important to know, even now with our education, with our affluence, with the access to all the science and resources that we have, even us, we are all susceptible. If you read the cognitive psychology work on eyewitness testimony and on cognitive biases, all that stuff, we're still, with a PhD, you're still susceptible to making all of these mistakes. All, not really being able to, they show when there's a robbery, people are more likely to focus on the gun, and then they still will try to, say that they can describe the person, but they really can't. And these are educated, modern, Americans, and so if we're not immune to that, then of course some Iron Age,
So much the worse for them.
So much worse, exactly.
Sometimes I think there can be a problem with just the opposite, that not thinking of them similarly to ourselves. For instance, Plato's stories of Socrates. I think a lot of philosophers aren't very bothered by the fact that he heard voices. Whereas if they found out that calling down the hall heard voices, I think they might be.
I had one of those colleagues actually, and I was pretty suspicious of it.
But that's a really good point.
Well, yeah, I've got a slide here. It's actually, I hid the slide, but it's come up in both of my recent talks about the halo effect. And it's directly relevant to that question. Here's one of the other issues in the background. This is one of these cognitive